Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJCA and Center for Coordinated Assistance to States Staff Recruitment and Retention webinar. My name is Wendy Faulkner, and I am the Assistant Executive Director of the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators. I would like to thank you all for registering for today's webinar and taking time out of your busy schedules to focus on this important issue and working to improve the conditions of confinement. And most importantly, working to improve long-term outcomes for youth entrusted to our care. Today's webinar will provide an overview of our recently published Staff Recruitment and Retention Toolkit. For those of you who are new to CJCA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and residential facilities, services, programs, and most importantly, long-term outcomes for youth and their families. CJCA represents the juvenile systems CEOs in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and various major metropolitan counties. Next slide, please. This program is made possible through funding from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. This is a grant opportunity the American Institute for Research, the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators, and the Georgetown University McCourt School of Public Policy's Center for Juvenile Justice Reform have partnered to form the Center for Coordinated Assistance to States, otherwise known as CCAS. Next slide, please. CCAS coordinates the delivery of training and technical assistance to states, communities, territories, and tribal units looking to improve outcomes for at-risk youth and youth involved in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems. The focus of the center is to provide ongoing training and technical assistance to achieve individual and organizational changes that support positive impact on the juvenile justice system. Next slide. On the call today is Sharon Pett, who is the project manager for the Staff Recruitment and Retention cohort. We also have Darlene Conroy and Jonah Shenham, who are helping with the technical aspects of this program from the CJCA office in Braintree, Massachusetts. I would like to give special thanks to Sharon, who has put a great deal of work into the preparation of this webinar, as well as our presenters for today, Simone Gonsolin with the American Institute for Research, and both Jackie Chamberlain and Mark Ossenbach from the Utah Juvenile Justice Services. At this point, I'm going to ask Jonah to provide us with a few technical instructions before we start. Jonah?
Thank you, Wendy. So for this webinar, all attendees will be muted for the duration of the call. But if you have a question, you can type it in at any time to the GoToWebinar control panel. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session and answer these questions. So if you do have a question, please make sure when you submit it to address your question to the relevant panelist. If we run out of time at the end, then we will make sure to follow up with any unanswered questions via email after the close of the webinar. And now I will turn it over to Sharon Pett to get us started.
Great, thank you, Jonah. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Again, my name is Sharon Pett, and I'm an independent consultant who works closely with CJCA on a number of projects, including leading the development of the Staff Recruiting, Hiring, and Retention Toolkit. As Wendy mentioned, I'm also the project manager who is providing technical assistance and training to 3 jurisdictions who were selected to participate in the first year of the Staff Recruitment and Retention Technical Assistance Program, which again is funded by OJJP and provided through funds through CCAS. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the CJCA Toolkit, you can access it through the CJCA website underneath the Resources tab, and I encourage you all to kind of take a look at that. It's full of lots of information, some of which we'll cover today. So we know that staff retention and turnover has been a long-standing challenge for many, if not all, juvenile justice agencies, as well as other social service sectors, including adult corrections and many child welfare systems. So I just want to thank CJCA and CCAS for devoting the resources to this incredibly important topic. So let's talk about what we're going to accomplish today, or we hope to accomplish today on the webinar. So we want to share research, best practices, and specific strategies for recruiting and retaining qualified direct care staff. We also want to describe the role of facility and agency culture and the importance of staff wellness in staff retention. We're also going to be discussing the importance of data in hiring and retaining direct care staff, And lastly, we'll be providing a few additional resources that are related to workforce development that we feel might be helpful to your jurisdiction on this journey. So next slide, please. So let's get started. So this is what the research is telling us. Estimated turnover among direct care staff in juvenile justice facilities is between 20 and 25% per year. And quite frankly, for many jurisdictions, this figure is probably pretty low. Some of the agencies that I've worked with, particularly in the past 2 years, have had an upward of 50% turnover rate. So studies have also estimated that excessive turnover can cost agencies between $10,000 and $20,000 per adult correctional employee, while other studies have estimated this amount to be $31,000 per exiting employee. So it's a very costly issue. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of staff turnover? So staff departures increase the risk of serious incidents because often staff departures lead to a reduced staff to youth ratio. High staff turnover also increases stress on staff. The frequent use of mandatory overtime to cope with excessive turnover in order to cover those vacancies for those posted positions promotes staff burnout, which increases the likelihood that staff are going to leave. So high staff turnover causes our staff to be overworked, decreases staff morale, destabilizes daily operations, and can really be detrimental to an agency's public image, which in turn makes it even more difficult to recruit staff in the future. So a shortage of staff diminishes the therapeutic interactions with youth and ultimately negatively impacts youth outcomes. So we all know that much of the treatment, especially in a juvenile justice facility, occurs in the context of those daily staff to youth interactions. So if a facility is operating with less than adequate staffing levels, or a facility is using mostly temporary staff to cover vacancies, the therapeutic nature of those staff-to-use interactions is greatly weakened. So consequently, staff turnover can jeopardize an agency's ability to achieve its mission and positively impacts the lives of the youth they serve. And lastly, as we saw in the last slide, staff turnover is financially costly. So costs come in the form of unanticipated expenses, such as overtime costs, workers' compensation claims, and some of those legal fees that can result from an increased number of serious incidents. So, and these costs are in addition to the resources that an agency invests when an employee is first hired, such as new employee orientation training, uniforms, and criminal background checks. So those things all cost money. Next slide, please. So, but the good news is voluntary turnover can be influenced, which is why we're talking about this today. So the truth is that the professional relationship between employer and employee does not typically end suddenly, but rather it dissolves over time. So it often takes months and possibly years of staff enduring frustrating conditions that kind of get folks thinking about that they may want to leave an organization. But this is often long before some emotional event occurs that kind of puts them over the edge and actually triggers them to leave. So I think this is a really important point to reiterate and for folks to understand that staff turnover is a gradual disengagement process that plays out over weeks, months, and sometimes even years. And eventually, staff who don't feel heard or don't feel connected and or committed to the agency inevitably talk with their feet, as the author Stinchcomb and researcher Stinchcomb has said in the past. So next slide, please. So we're going to start to talk about the biggest factor that impacts staff retention, which is agency and facility culture. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Jackie and Mark to share with us some information about culture and the work environment. Jackie and Mark, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon. Hey, the impact of agency and facility culture. Culture is often defined as the social order of an organization. To recognize that culture influences attitudes and behaviors is an understatement. The norms themselves by that culture, they often define what's encouraged or discouraged, accepted or also rejected within a group. Now, the agency and facility culture itself, there's a significant impact on that work environment. To have a tremendous impact on itself and also on staff retention. When we look at goals, the ultimate goal, of course, is a collaborative, caring, and stable work environment. And there's different strategies that we can enlist to get there. There's also some detriments and byproducts themselves of a poor culture. So if you look at the next slide, sorry about that. The fact that agency and facility culture is essential is a no-brainer. We understand that. Now, there's some key characteristics that most successful organizations have. And one of them is that close alignment between the mission and the management. A lot of times, our folks don't even know what our mission is as an organization. There's importance with consistent two-way communication. We often hear that our supervisors have an open door policy. And all that means is that they hope that they never come in through that door, the people that we hire. It's important that what goes on at the top is clearly communicated all the way to the bottom. Fair, value-driven policies are also very, very important for most successful organizations. Procedures, decision-making practices, these things are mirrored throughout an organization and start not just at top-down, but bottom-up leadership. Clear expectations and objective performance measures also play a vital role in the success of an organization. Now, opportunities for growth and development are huge. We hear often the importance of the different types of people within the workforce that we're employing and what skills they bring to the table, whether or not they're from a certain generation. But what the research has shown is that people, regardless of when they were born, look for those opportunities for growth and for development to be able to be successful in the organization. Participatory management is important. Managers that actually take an active role in engaging the folks that they serve. Recognition and appreciation. This is done formally and informally, officially and unofficially throughout an organization. And then finally, quality-oriented supervision. We often hear people, the reason why they might not be involved so much on a supervisory level is that they hire good people, and that's the reason why supervisors don't approach them much. And this is pretty shallow and nearsighted supervision style. When we hire good people, in order to keep them engaged in the workforce and understanding and reinforcing the mission, vision, and values of the organization, it's important that they're checked in consistently. Accountability, quite many times, is often looked at as a bad thing, has negative connotations, and that's farthest from the truth. People like to be told when they're doing a good job, just as you and I do. And one way to do that is through that quality-oriented supervision. And then that mutually supportive teamwork, that sense of family, professional pride in the organization, in the mission, vision, and goals of the organization. There are some key characteristics of a healthy culture, one of which is a friendly and supportive interactions. Do people talk to one another? Are they happy to be at work? These are important things that we sometimes neglect. Respectful communications themselves between higher and lower ranking staff. Irregardless of title or status, they should be able to communicate with one another, and everyone's input and opinion should matter. Those respectful interactions between staff and the youth themselves, justice-involved individuals. Decision-making and follow-through, it's important that it's reliable and consistent. And role modeling by leadership. We are kidding ourselves if we don't think those folks that work for us and work with us aren't watching us and holding us, that we become the standard of our organization. Are we truly a reflection of the mission, vision, and values of what we espouse? Leaders themselves need to be visible and regularly interact with direct care staff. Regular facility visits by executive team members. I know in Utah, Juvenile Justice, our director does a phenomenal job of going out and visiting. He made it his goal to visit every facility, regardless of program service area within the state, kind of like within his first 100 days. Leaders need to be open and transparent, and they need to be trusted by staff. It is very important that you do what you say and that staff feel that you have their best interests. Now, it's important to use data to understand culture also. Gathering that information can play a huge role in how we're successful or how we're not. And there's some ways to go about doing that. It's important to assess the agency's readiness for change. A lot of times what we feel are the problems or the issues necessarily aren't always the case. And so some tools that we can use to identify what they are, one of which is a culture climate survey. Now, I know the CJCA does a phenomenal job. They have a program called Performance-Based Standards that actually issues these culture climate surveys. And this is one way to go ahead and gather that data. In those culture climate surveys, staff understand what the mission is. We can gauge that, whether or not they do. Is leadership trusted? Are they honest? Are they respected? And staff feel supported and empowered. These are just a few of the elements that are contained in those staff culture climate surveys. Okay, there's also some climate surveys that can take place with those that we serve. And there's a similar elements that we can look at and measure. The Oregon Youth Authority has quarterly conversations in which they discuss safety and security, whether or not they have a caring and supportive relationships between the youth and the staff, the high expectations and accountability. Again, accountability is not a bad thing as long as the only time when we have those conversations isn't in a negative light. Meaningful participation and community connection are also extremely important. Now, exit surveys and interviews play a vital role in identifying where we are at culturally within an organization. You have often heard of these stay interviews. And stay interviews are important. You can look at them, you can see what data you can gather from them, you can mine from those. But with exit surveys, sometimes those are don't quite have as much of an impact on what organizational culture is doing or portraying. What I would recommend is a central suppository for those exit surveys, because many times those individuals leaving are being interviewed by supervisors or folks they know. And Jackie's going to talk about retention.
I'll be talking about recruiting and hiring direct care staff.
Sorry, thanks, Jackie.
So, no, that's okay. We'll be talking about, I'll be going, the next slide, please. So the toolkit organizes the recruitment and hiring process into 4 main stages when recruiting staff: job analysis and competency development, sourcing talent, assessing talent, and engaging talent. Next slide. The job analysis and competency development. This is understanding what you need, what your organization needs. For core competencies, this is a great quote by Switchcomb: measurable knowledge, skills, and abilities staff need to fulfill the agency's mission and vision. You want to ensure that the job descriptions are up to date prior to recruiting. Some organizations keep their recruitments for years, and they're not updating those job announcements, and it's important that we keep those up to date. Second, we want to create a set of core competencies to be emphasized in the job announcements and throughout the recruiting and interviewing process. And we want to include the agency mission in the job description and emphasize a strengths-based and treatment approach. Rather than just saying we're a correctional facility, we want to emphasize those things that will help youth achieve their goal of reducing recidivism. Next slide. For the direct care job functions, we want to create a set of competencies for potential recruits that will set the stage on the expectations and will keep your candidates strong by leading with the strengths-based qualities. These can be things like behavioral management, crisis intervention, safety and security, record keeping and report writing, program maintenance, problem solving, and organizational awareness. Next slide. Next thing I want to talk about is the sourcing talent or recruitment. The foremost recruitment issue is not how to fill vacancies, but rather it's how to identify and attract the type of employees who will best advance the organization's mission. We want employees who share our passion to work with youth and families. We really do. We don't want employees who are not passionate about the work, but those who are going to stay with us for a long time and who are passionate about keeping youth out of the system. Next slide. So the employee value proposition provides a framework highlighting why employees want to work for a company. They highlight competitive strengths of a position, and it separates them from the similar roles offered elsewhere. These are really important for organizations to recruit staff. You want to focus on things like tangible rewards. That is putting in the recruitment what the applicants, those tangible rewards on what they will want, like paid time off, the medical benefits, the compensation. We also want to look at the opportunity, the need to understand the benefits of the career path and the structure. And then we want to emphasize that the organization's mission and vision, like I said previously. People want to work for an organization that they can be proud of. You want to pull at their heartstrings a bit in that recruitment. Why do you want to work for you? Why do you want to help you succeed? So that because they're going to be your friends and your neighbors, and we just want to make sure that we add that vision statement in the recruitment. And then the people, they want to know who they're going to work with and what makes them a team. So oftentimes organizations will, in their interview process, they'll do a facility tour where potential recruits can walk around the facility and they can do a meet and greet with staff and they can see who they will work with and what makes them a team. And then, of course, we want to talk about the work. We need to let applicants know the type of work that they're going to be doing and a typical work day. We don't want to, if we have 24-hour shift work in a secure care facility, we want to make sure that the applicants understand that so that they don't get hired and that we don't give them false expectations. So we'll tell them that it's usually swing shift, and we let them know all of that up front. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about recruitment strategies. Agencies should spend time on a wide range of strategies to recruit. It is important to note that they should expand their recruitment strategies beyond the typical methods. We've all heard about regular advertisements and putting them on the state jobs website or in the newspaper. We want to expand those things to pull in a wide range of applicants. You can advertise through professional or national associations. We can encourage employees to become recruiters. Usually, for Utah anyway, those are our best recruiters. We find more people come to work when they know somebody that works with youth and they can hear about those success stories personally. We also can create social or electronic media advertising. Posting those recruitments on LinkedIn, Facebook, Indeed, Career Builder. We use Indeed, LinkedIn, and we use our local newspaper. We can also use the local media to shine a spotlight on the positive work staff do with youth. You can do a regular pitch with media, or you can have media come and spend 24 hours at a facility and those stories you can post the recruitment at the bottom of the newspaper article. And then, of course, the job boards at local colleges. This can be posted on the job boards. You can speak with the staff or the professors at the colleges, and they can let you come in and speak through classes to explain what you do and why we need those people. And then we can have an open house and invite the community members and potential job speakers. Or we can create an internship program. We do this currently with local colleges to draw students from various social service fields. And then create a list or pool of qualified applicants and resumes for former applicants. So if there are people who have worked for you and then they left to go to school because they couldn't always keep that list so that you can call them back, especially when we have qualified staff and we like their work. Next slide. You can also seek out resources to assist with the local recruitment process. New York City has or NYC, I'm not sure what NYC stands for, but they have a Workforce One centers operated by New York City Small Business Services. You can speak at local colleges and universities. Engage CJCA in helping with recruitment. And then you can offer providers incentives for recruiting. You can give gift cards, movie tickets, parking, extra vacation days, referral bonus. You can tell staff that if they refer somebody, that you can give them an incentive. You can identify current employees with whom potential candidates should speak. And you can conduct pre-hire activities on the weekend. Conducting pre-hire activities simultaneously with other processes will prevent unnecessary delays in the hiring process. Next slide. So research indicates that there are generational differences between what attracts and lures employees to an organization. So you might need to alter your recruitment strategy accordingly. If you're trying to recruit Generation Xers, for example, born between 1965 and 1980, you would want to emphasize in the job announcement the unique aspects of the organization and the job. Highlight the leadership's openness to dialogue and discussion, but only if it is true. Emphasize technology. Point to opportunities for training and career advancement. Identify opportunities for personal growth and development. Show how the job can make a difference in their community. Emphasize the balance between work and life. For example, 12-hour shifts. That might make a difference. You might change those to 10-hour shifts. Highlight the wellness and fitness programs. If you have a gym that youth use, you can talk about being able to use that gym as well. And then have Gen Xers ready to talk to applicants. And if you're trying to recruit millennials, you want to involve the parents and emphasize the technology. Highlight the teamwork. Emphasize the balance between work and life. And highlight the leadership's openness to dialogue and discussion, but only if it is true. Emphasize the training, career advancement opportunities, and mentoring. Next, we'll talk about assessing talent for the screening selection piece. For the staff selection, standards and processes that support good hiring decisions, including a variety of objective and subjective pre-hire tactics. For example, interviews, tests, assessments, background investigations. You can have your initial screening interview or your initial screen, which is drug testing, background check, driving record check. It's important when you're doing that recruitment and you meet with the individuals that you let them know that you will be doing a background check and drug testing prior to them being hired. You'll also be contacting their past jobs. And then you might administer a computerized assessment to evaluate specific personality traits and beliefs that align with work in the juvenile justice field and candidates' risk. We provide an extensive tour conducted by existing staff to allow candidates to observe staff-to-youth interactions and program activities. This is really key, I think, when you're doing those either first interviews or second interviews, because then you get a feel for the applicants that you're about to hire, and they can see that teamwork that makes it so important to come on board. Next slide. Now we're going to be talking about the interview questions. You should always look for the following traits when developing interview questions. You want to have a balanced perspective. You want applicants to have a broad view that balances the present needs and long-term considerations. You also want to have a strategic view. A strategic view, the ability to collect and analyze information that forms an overall long-range view of priorities to forecast likely needs and problems and opportunities. Environmental sensitivity, the awareness of broad environmental trends and the effects of those trends on the work unit. And then leadership, the ability to and willingness to lead and manage others. Obviously, we'll want to hire people that will stay with us and that will become leaders one day. We want to make sure that the candidate is flexible and has an openness to new information as well as a tolerance for stress and ambiguity in the work situation. And then you want them to be action-oriented, results-focused, that they have a strong concern for the goal of achievement and a tenacity to follow the project through to completion. It's also important to have strong communication skills, interpersonal sensitivity, and technical competence. They have to be able to complete the tasks without any struggle. And there are more characteristics we can look for when recruiting. We want to make sure that candidates work well under pressure. When creating your interview questions, you might do some scenarios to see how they can handle a stressful situation with the youth and staff. You want to be fair and consistent with the incentives and consequences. So if you have a staff member that is overly harsh or punitive, then they might not make a great applicant for the juvenile justice system. They might be better in the adult system. And then you want applicants to be focused on having a strength-based approach in their work. And then we, of course, want them to understand the basic adolescent brain development and trauma and how trauma affects juveniles within the system. And we want them to be able to interact effectively with youth. Flexible work schedule availability, understands exposure risk, and make sure that they are comfortable with sensitive job duties. They can talk with youth and have difficult conversations. Or if they have to conduct those strip searches or supervising showers, we have to make sure that prior to hiring, we look at those things. Okay. Next slide. Another way to assess quality candidates is to use competency-based behavior during those interviews. So it's competency-based behavior interviewing. And this is using scenarios to elicit information about how a candidate will respond to a specific situation. You want to have a structured interview format, and you assess whether the job applicant has the knowledge and competency to perform the job as it relates to the juvenile justice setting. Next slide. One organization who uses this competency-based interviewing is the Massachusetts Department of Youth Services. They developed a competency library of 40 competencies associated with various types of work. For their group worker one, which we would probably call our counselor ones, we want to make sure that they're action-oriented, that they're adaptable, they have the applied learning ability, they can build trust, strong communicators, strong at conflict management, and if they're customer or client focused, and that they have strong decision making or problem solving, show initiative in their work, and that they're aware of safety at all times, and they can handle stress and strong teamwork. And then for those group worker 2 and 3 competencies, you can see they're almost the same, but they also add the team leadership piece and delegating responsibility. And that they are strong with cultural competence. Next slide. If you're able to go to the toolkit on page 28, you can see that this exhibit provides examples of key interview competency questions and the competency that they're looking for. One of the questions would be, tell us about a time when you dealt with or worked closely with a youth, a difficult or angry person. So what were the circumstances? How did you handle it? And this is assessing for conflict management. What was the result? Share with us a situation at work when you gained the trust of a coworker who initially resisted your efforts. You're assessing for that competency of building trust. Can they interact in a way that gives them confidence in one's motives and those of the organization? Are they direct and truthful? And then the last one, tell us about a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was very different from yours. Tell me more about the situation. What did you do? How did this turn out? And usually you grade these on a Likert scale. You want to see if they're strong in that competency area or if they could use help. I mean, are these things that you can train? If they're not great at teamwork, then can you train that? Can you train this conflict management? Are they right out of college and they've not used these skills before? And if you can train them, then they might be a good hire. But if they can't be trained, then obviously you look for new applicants. Next slide. Now I'll be talking about the engaging talent or the hiring and onboarding section, which is the process to acclimate new staff to the organization and initial job training to prepare them for their new duties. 3 factors that may contribute to applicants not seeking employment with an agency. They have a lack of feedback on the application status, or they submit an application and they have an interview and then they never hear back, or they're so bogged down, HR is bogged down and they can't process applications fast enough, or the process is unclear, or it is too complicated. We want to try to eliminate those things up front so that we can keep applicants. Agencies must have a clear and efficient process for onboarding new staff in a timely manner. We want to minimize the time between their submission, their screening, and when they get hired. And then we want to keep them satisfied as soon as they're with us. Next slide, please. We want to create a supportive environment for new staff, especially in that first year of employment. We found that it is key, if we can keep them happy during that first year, we can likely keep them for a second year. And if we can keep them for 4 years, because that is when they become vested in Utah systems, then we can keep them indefinitely. Agencies might consider creating a formal mentoring program in which a designated veteran staff is required to maintain contact with the new employee throughout the first year. So they might have that key employee mentor that follows them around and checks off their skill set and checks on them regularly to make sure that they're doing okay. And then we want to establish an online community, whether that's through email or social media, Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or any of those things. And then making the new employee feel welcome. Having regular team meetings, taking them out to lunch if it's possible, or having team lunches within the facility keeps that team culture and helps employees stay satisfied. And I think that's it for my section. We'll be talking about retention next.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate the information you shared with us, as well as Mike from Utah. Now that we have the right staff in place, let's see what we can do about retaining them. I'm sure the 150 people who are on this webinar work toward goals to retain staff on a daily basis. As a former state director, I was always concerned about retaining well-trained, qualified staff, quality staff. Hopefully, a few ideas we share with you today can be implemented to assist you in this particular area. Next slide. Let's first take a look at staff retention factors. Retention can be defined as issues, processes, and strategies that promote or stand in the way of an agency's ability to retain quality staff. There are multiple factors that fall under retention. First one is organizational culture. You know, is the culture toxic, or is it promoting a healthy work environment? The second one, ongoing feedback and recognition. You know, staff needs to know that they're doing a good job, or identify areas in which they may need to grow in a little. Training and professional development, once again, a critical area for staff to really understand if the system is going through some type of reform or changes in policy or practice. Promotional opportunities are really important for staff. They see people are working hard, they're getting promotions and moving up to positions where they might have a little more responsibility. And then finally, measures to address staff safety, health, wellness, and morale. So all of those things are pretty darn important as far as staff retention is concerned. Next slide. Share a little research with you around staff retention. And according to the research, there are two significant types of factors that influence a person's decision to stay put in a job. First one is organizational factors. These all may influence a person's decision to remain in their position. These typically include job satisfaction, safety, and job stress. All of which of these can be talked about, discussed, and also measured. If we go back to the previous slide, you remember that was one of the main factors that was shared with you a little earlier. Also, individual factors are critically important too, because if a staff member is not feeling connected to the overall mission, they likely will not stay. If there is mistrust between the staff and the leadership, and not agreeing with the agency's direction is also an individual factor that may cause staff retention to be a problem. Next slide. So what do these organizational and individual factors look like in a facility? Some of the organizational factors might be, does the employee feel they contribute? Do they feel as though they remember the team? Do they feel the work that they're doing really has value? Is they making a difference, either in the mission of the agency and the outcomes for kids? Do they get along with and respect their coworkers? Very, very critically important, right? That everybody works as a team, especially in a facility where it does take an entire team to make things work the way they need to and make sure those outcomes are positive for the facility and then also for the youth, of course. And are there too many stressors in the job? That's another organizational factor that will impact retention. Also, whether or not the staff member feels safe from harm, from potentially violent youth, and then also retribution from leadership. Some individual factors that are seen oftentimes in juvenile justice settings and makes people feel a little uncomfortable or not connected to an overall mission, not seeing how their day-to-day work really contributes to the agency's purpose and mission. Staff not trusting leadership, and this is often what people call parking lot conversations, where people between shifts end up having a parking lot conversation about the leadership and about how decisions are made, especially around promotion and recognition. And then staff not agreeing with the direction the agency is headed is also a critical individual factor. So we thought we'd have a little fun with you, and we're going to put up a couple of polling questions here, and Jonah is going to work his magic on the logistical end to get that polling question up. If he gets it up, though, I just want to let you know there's no wrong answers, and we really just want to get the feel for each of you that's on this webinar. So I'll go ahead and read it to you, but please feel free to click on the answer you think is most appropriate. So the majority of employees who leave their jobs leave for the following reasons: see more money, unfavorable assigned job duties, poor agency and facility culture, poor supervisor management relationships, work conditions they feel are intolerable. So it looks like about 50% of you so far are saying poor supervisors or manager relationships. with poor agency facility culture coming right behind it at about 24%. So we'll let this go for a couple of seconds longer, and we'll give you an overall review of how the poll ended. And remember, like I said, these are all reasons why people leave their jobs. But we wanted to hear from you what you thought was probably the major reason why people leave their positions. So I think we're kind of at a standstill here, Jonah. It looks like about 46% poor supervisor-manager relationships, 28% poor agency facility culture, and about 13% leave for more money. Work conditions would be fourth, and then the final one is unfavorable assigned job duties. But thanks for taking the time to do that. And it looks like 3/4 of you who are on the call actually participated, so we appreciate that. So we have one more question that Jonah is pulling up there. And this question is just the opposite, right? So which element to high retention organizations is most important to you remaining in your position? So in those high retention organizations, which we hope your facility or agency is, what's most important to you for you to stay in your position? A clean sense of direction, knowing what's expected and you know where you're going strategically, rewards and recognition, adequate training and professional development, flexible and individualized benefits and schedules, taking into account people's needs outside of the workplace, and then open lines of communication. So let's see. Wow, we have it's a pretty split bag here. About 30% are saying flexible and individualized benefits and schedule. 21% adequate training and professional development, as well as open lines of communication. About 25% clear sense of direction, and 8% rewards and recognition. We'll give this another second or two, and we'll figure out what our final tally is. And like I said, all of these are correct answers from the research. We just wanted to get a feel for what you felt was important to you. All right, so flexible and individualized benefits and schedules was number one, but closely behind a clear sense of direction, then open lines of communication, adequate training and professional development, and then what drops off to only about 9% would be rewards and recognition. So thanks a lot for taking part in that poll, and hopefully you saw some areas where maybe you could address some of these, especially if you're managers or supervisors, to keep staff happy and engaged, and it can actually retain the staff a little better. As with the other presenters, we wanted to share a little research with you. So we'll sort of pull together these two polling questions we have provided in sharing this research with you, done by multiple researchers, and it's the reasons why we oftentimes struggle keeping staff. So Jonah, if you could go to the next slide. All right, thank you very much. So what does the research say? Job satisfaction is a significant predictor of actual turnover. We saw that in the way you responded to the poll as well. Direct cash staff are most dissatisfied with inconsistencies in supervisor managers and management behaviors not aligning with the agency's values. Once again, that was one of the highest votes that were given in the polling question by you. And then other areas are inadequate pay, limited recognition for a job well done, and few opportunities for that professional growth. Now, what the research also saw in facilities was that even though the person may be dissatisfied with some of these factors, they may not always leave. They may not become disengaged, and they still choose not to leave the organization. This, unfortunately, can produce a pretty unhealthy climate, and we talked about that earlier on, having that healthy climate, and some of the information that Utah shared with you, they identified some of the activities they had in place to address a healthy work climate. Next slide. Let's look at a little more data. The data tells us that 80 to 90% of employees leave for reasons related not to money, but rather because of job duties, supervisor, manager, and the work environment. So we have several researchers who are telling us the same thing around people actually leaving work. There was a study done of 1,000 employees who found that while supervisors believe employees rank good wages as their top priority, so when supervisors were talked to or surveyed, the supervisor said the top priority was money, right, wages. However, the survey of the employees was not the same. As a matter of fact, it made into the top 5, but it was number 5. So employees were more interested in the work, appreciation for a job. Employees said they would stay, the reasons why people would stay in their jobs. So we'll go to the next slide, and you'll see the word loyalty there. The greatest retention challenge is not how to reduce turnover. And this, as a state director, was always something that I said, we have to reduce turnover, but rather it is how to create a deep, unified commitment to the organizational vision that employees will be reluctant to leave because they've actually developed a bond between the facility and the employer. So I think I'm on the next slide, Jonah. Let's see the next slide moving. Okay, there we go. Now we're in the right place. Very good. We're on the same page now. So far, we've heard about how management related factors influence people either bonding with the facility and remaining there as a career, or they do not bond and leave. So what are some of these factors that influence people, why people end up leaving their roles? Management demands that one person does the job of 2 or more people, resulting in longer days. Now, this is not something that happens just one day, every once in a while, but something that is pretty routine. Management does not allow direct care staff to make decisions. You know, people want some autonomy. They want to feel as though they're contributing to the decision making and the practice there at the facility. Management consistently is constantly in the state of organizing, shuffling people around, changing direction, roles and responsibilities, and there's really not stability there in the job that you're doing. Management doesn't take the time to clarify goals and decisions. Decisions are just made, and people have got to react to them. And then management shows favoritism, and oftentimes that causes a real issue for staff to stay in their job and to keep that bond with the facility. So what are some solutions? Around management related factors that influence people to leave? First of all, implementing strategies to increase organizational commitment is critically important. Promoting job satisfaction, providing staff input into decisions, and reducing job stress. Those are all critically important pieces to the solution to the problem of staff retention. Also, agencies must target improvements in staff perceptions of supervision, organizational communication, and employing quality co-workers to really work alongside them. Critically important is a solution around staff retention. The next slide, one of the major researchers in retention, Gregory Smith, who authored Here Today, Here Tomorrow, Transforming Your Workforce from High Turnover to High Retention, he identified 8 elements of high retention organizations. The first one is a clear sense of direction. Every day shouldn't be a new day. You know, people should know where they're going, what they're doing, and they should know clearly what their expectations are when they walk in the door. So, Jonah, we should be on the next slide at this point. Caring management, we have to give staff our time. as managers. Flexible benefits and schedules, that was one of the highest ones. That was the highest one, actually, for the group on the call today. Open lines of communication, set up office hours, also walk through facilities, talking to staff, and really engaging with them in conversations. A charged work environment where there's some high energy there and also high expectations of staff. Performance management, you have to provide feedback to staff on their performance. Rewards and recognition, very important to stop the train from going down the tracks and recognize a staff member for the work that they've done. And then training and development. We need to ask them what it is that they want and what is it that they need. Okay, and Jonah, I'm finished with that, so we'll go to the next one. Super, thank you. So you heard a little earlier in the presentation, there was a conversation around generational considerations as far as hiring is concerned, but there are also some generational considerations as far as retention. So if you go to Generation X, which would be probably the individuals between the ages of 40 and 60, say, those things that are important to them are things such as professional development opportunities where they can enhance their skills, deepen their knowledge, offer autonomy. You know, like they really like to have a moment where they can be in charge, they can make some decisions, provide flexibility in the workplace, and then be genuine and direct. So if we go to millennials, and these are individuals who tend to be within that 30 to 40-year-old age group, provide a mentor and a coach as a supervisor. So have that sort of approach to supervision. They care about their personal and career goals, and we have to commit to helping them achieve those goals. So what can we do to help you achieve those career goals? Don't just ask about them, but what can we do to promote them, right? Make work meaningful. They have to feel like they're connected to a mission and a cause, and engage social media, which is, of course, a way to communicate that potentially the 40 to 60-year-olds don't necessarily need. Frequent and productive feedback is also very important to those people who are between the ages of 30 and 40. Now, for Generation X, for those individuals under the age of 30 and to, even late teens, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, consider work experience over education as much more critical. So they're not quite into the research into things, they're more into the practice. Let me learn all the steps that I need to take in order to carry out my job. Use of technology, it has changed from generation to generation. And for this generation, it is very, very different. And the use of technology is something that they need to get their hands on every single day. Emphasize making a difference in a young person's life. And this is pretty critical for this age group. All right, so that gives you a little information about these various generations, these three generations here that you have in your workplace. And you can see that some of the considerations are similar, but others are of course, very different. So, take some time to take a look at these after the webinar, because it'll be archived and potentially may help you down the line. Next slide. It is difficult to speak to staff retention without considering the latest research pertaining to trauma. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines trauma as a response resulting from an event or series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by a person as either physical or emotional harm, or even is life-threatening, that has lasting adverse effects on functioning, mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. As all of you know, the prevalence of youth in our system have been traumatized prior to coming to us in an astronomical manner and astronomical numbers. As we study trauma and its effect, we continue to learn more and more about not only the impact that these traumatic events have on the youth in our care and our own trauma, but we also must consider another type of trauma. And the next slide identifies this trauma as vicarious trauma. You may have heard it as compassion fatigue or secondary trauma. And this is where staff who provide services to a highly traumatized population are indirectly traumatized. The interaction between staff members and the traumatized youth places direct care staff at a heightened risk for secondary trauma, which we know is a topic that has been talked about maybe for the last 18 to 24 months within the juvenile justice system. And we're becoming a little more knowledgeable about this work. I know CJCA has had best practices workshops in this particular area and have worked with Dr. Chris Branson from the New York University to assist us in this particular area, becoming a little more trauma informed and learning about what our staff needs to overcome their own trauma, and then also the trauma that comes from working with a highly charged trauma involved population. Next slide. How can we help our staff to become more resilient to vicarious trauma or creating a healthy work environment? There are a couple of suggestions here that are found in the guide. Education, self-help resources, so you can offer modules for staff. Also employee assistance programs where you have employed staff that's trained to survey staff members, to get down to feelings and to determine what it is that's giving them some problems. Peer groups, critically important, to spend some time where the group can in fact exchange ideas. I'll share a personal experience here. I was the director of the Louisiana system when Hurricane Katrina hit, and one of the facilities from the New Orleans area was in fact moved to the Baton Rouge facility, about an hour and a half away. And the staff came with them. And this was something that was critically important to us, that every evening we would have the Baton Rouge staff come in and sort of man their post, and all the shifts who worked with the kids back in New Orleans who are now displaced had about an hour's time to talk, to commiserate, to talk about how they were refurbishing their home during the rebuild, how they were covering matters with their family and those sorts of things. It was an unbelievably healthy experience. I actually made it there twice, at least twice, where I got to hear the conversation. And it was very touching and enriching to the staff, and the staff continued to stay motivated because they were displaced. They were displaced from their homes, and they were displaced as far as work was concerned. Religious and spiritual support services are critically important. Field training officers would be providing mentoring services. Jackie talked about fitness activities, of allowing staff to have activity time to become physically fit and kind of, work off frustrations of the day and that sort of thing. Classes on stress management, offer yoga, breathing techniques, meditation. Utah talked about a staff wellness committee to really look at what's needed across the system to ensure that staff was well and was able to function when they came to work the next day. Town hall meetings where the leadership talks about the direction as to where things are going, but also to hear questions and concerns of the staff and to get input from the staff on a regular basis. Staff retreats are really important to, get staff away from their normal work environment, get them to another location, even if it's on the grounds of the facility, but to relieve them of their duties so that they can, in fact, absorb without the demands of the job with the messages that's being provided to ensure that there is a healthy work environment. Alternative work schedules, once again, a very highly rated condition that you talked about. And then contracting with local gyms. We've seen where that people who worked at a certain facility had a reduced membership into some gyms. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. When a critical incident occurs in your facility, it's pretty important as part of the debriefing of this major incident, to really talk with staff, find out what's going on. It's not just the staff who were involved. It's really important to involve all staff in the debriefing, because if not, they're going to hear certain things that may have not occurred, and this way they can get sort of the straight scoop, and they may be able to talk about the fact that some of this occurred to them, which is really getting at staff trauma as well. Relieve staff of their post immediately following that serious incident. You want to make sure that pre-employment training should include the impact of trauma on youth, the impact of trauma on staff, specific skills for responding to youth, and skills for staff to manage their own stress and trauma. The next slide, this slide provides a few helpful tips or activities that promote employee self-care. Some of these activities are cut yourself a break. Ask yourself, what would I say to a colleague in this same situation? Don't be so hard on yourself. Hit the pause button. Just take a moment to think things through, gather your composure, and move on to the next task. Debrief before or past successes. Use breaks or commute time to really connect with friends and loved ones instead of always trying to engage in what do I have to do today when I get to work. Who feeds your energy and who drains it? So, make sure that the people you work with, the people you work next to, are those people who feed your energy. Build restorative breaks into your day. Create and adhere to your own safety plan or self-care plan. And this is something that we're seeing more and more juvenile justice agencies in Department of Corrections actually developing safety plans and self-care plans for their staff with them alongside the staff member. And then also, what about a healthy forum for staff and youth to express needs, such as youth advisory councils, as well as, say, the town hall meetings that we talked about a little earlier. The next slide. What are some practices to promote staff and youth safety? One of the things that's critically important is training adolescent brain development and trauma-informed care, situational awareness, awareness of your environment, and pick up cues from youth and from staff. You're going to have to train staff on how to notice these things. It's not something that just comes naturally to everybody. De-escalation techniques, of course, critically important. Use of force and restraint in a proper manner. Involuntary room confinement, defensive disengagement without causing injury. So all of these practices can help to promote staff and youth safety in the facilities. And then also cognitive behavioral treatment interventions, and finally behavior management, such as a multi-tiered system of support, such as positive behavior interventions and supports, better known as PBIS. All right, the next slide really talks to practices that promote staff and youth safety, a continuation of that conversation, ongoing training and the need for a job coach, increased structured programming, keep youth busy and engaged, keep them occupied, effectively managing youth behavior. You should have a strategic formalized behavior management program within your facility. Staff serving as a teacher, mentor, counselor, in which staff guide and support youth in developing new skills necessary to be successful in the community so they don't continue to make bad decisions. Sufficient number of staff to accommodate programming, transports, transition. The day and evening shift is sometimes very difficult in a facility, especially if you're having trouble retaining staff, but it's something that we all need to work towards. And then positive relationships with coworkers in establishing those effective lines for communication as the leader has to set the example here. So thanks for your time today, and I'll turn this over to Sharon, who will begin the discussion on staff recognition.
Oh, great. Thanks, Simone, and thank you, Mark and Jackie, sorry. Next slide. Oh, there we go, great. So staff recognition, research has shown us that staff recognition is a really important piece that plays to retention. And here on the screen, you can just see some pieces here that are really important in terms of when you're thinking about staff recognition, making sure that the recognition or the reward is specific to that person, making sure that the reward is timely, so not giving award 4 years later after a big event or some huge contribution from the staff, and making sure, yeah, the reward matches the achievement. Next slide, please. One other thing I forgot to mention too is in terms of creating a recognition program, you want to make sure that you involve employees in that process. So asking your employees what would be helpful, what are the ways in which would be helpful for you to be recognized, what would be meaningful. So that's a really important piece. Some agencies have gone as far to have a recognition policy, which I think speaks volumes in terms of the seriousness or the commitment on behalf of the agency to appreciate and acknowledge the good work staff are doing. So here are just some recognition strategies. These are also in the toolkit, so you can kind of take a look at those. One of the ones is we heard something good about you, and that basically comes from your peers and staff, other staff members can acknowledge you, and then basically you can put your name in the hopper each week or each month, and then they draw from the bucket of folks, the names in the bucket, and then give them a little prize each month. And so that's something about the peers recognizing each other. So those are just some. I encourage you to take a look at the toolkit again that goes into, these are just a handful, but really great ideas in the toolkit. Okay, next slide. Okay, good. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of data in helping to shape recruitment and retention in your jurisdiction. So next slide, please. So there are two ways in which data can be extraordinarily helpful to you. So first of all, data can help you understand the problem by highlighting the root cause of a particular issue. So examples might be the type of individuals who are leaving your agency. At what point are those folks leaving your agency? Why are people choosing to stay, and so forth. So it can really be helpful in helping you understand and diagnose the issue. The second thing that data can do is help you track your progress toward your goals and help you determine if the solutions that you've selected or implemented are having the desired impact. So data can really tell you if you successfully recruited a certain number of staff members using a particular recruitment strategy, or if you were able to reduce the time between application submission and the first interview, for example. Next slide, please. So obviously there are dozens of possible measures to consider. These are just some few examples on the slide here related to recruitment and hiring. So you don't want to, nor should you, measure everything. So your jurisdiction will need to determine which measures are most meaningful to you. So once you've established your measures, it's important to create a formal data collection plan that includes both short and long-term goals. The reason why I strongly suggest developing a formal data collection plan is that some of the measures may require more time and resources than others in terms of gathering the data. So some measures will require initial steps now in order to have the data available further down the road, 3 years or 4 years from now. So you may need to, it might be an IT solution, you may need to add a couple click boxes to a particular field in your IT system or your case management system, and that obviously takes time. By the time you throw the idea, they figure out how they're going to do it, they do the beta testing, and then launch it, pilot, and all that stuff. So it takes a while to get there. So it really could be 2 or 3 years down the road before your solution is in place. And so you want to make sure that you're planning now, because all the data is not going to be immediately available. So I also want to remind folks about data integrity and how critical this piece is. So what we don't want to do is be making decisions based on incorrect or bad data. And so it's really critical that your agency clearly define each measure and develop the specific calculation for each measure. And I always encourage my clients to create a written desk reference manual that explains the measure and the definition, why it's an important measure, how to enter the data, how to pull reports, how do you ensure that the data is accurate, and so on. And I think doing this really does help guide the data collection process, and ultimately better ensures data integrity on the front end. And of course, on the back end, agencies should always develop formal quality assurance processes and those checks to make sure that we're catching errors early on and able to make the necessary changes or corrections as needed. Next slide, please. So here are just a few ideas for measures, again, related to staff retention. Again, the toolkit offers a number of other ones you might want to take a look at, but here are just some examples of retention and turnover rates by job title and classification, and you can break that out by those folks that leave involuntary versus voluntary. Average length of stay broken out by job title and classification, so who's leaving most often, or which classification of folks are leaving most often. The percentage of candidates who successfully complete new employee orientation and are still employed at the 6-month mark and the 12-month mark following their initial training completion. and then some data from culture climate surveys. So again, I encourage you to take a look at the toolkit as it offers many more ideas in terms of measures. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a few highlights just for folks to keep in mind. I know we gave you a lot of information today, and we are going to have time for a few questions, but I just want to kind of run through this and then provide you with some resources. So things to keep in mind. First one is that agency culture, we heard, that plays a large role in staff retention. So this means that leadership is supportive, knowledgeable, and open. And it also means that there's a team environment where coworkers can trust and depend on one another, and that staff are committed to the agency mission, that they're satisfied with their work, that they feel that they directly contribute to that overall mission in some way. And so, you know, agencies really must be willing to invest the resources that they needed to create this kind of positive culture and that kind of positive work environment if you're going to be successful in retaining those, you know, qualified staff long-term, particularly direct care staff. The second thing I want to say is that retention begins with effective recruitment strategy. As I can't emphasize this enough. You know, finding direct care staff who are a good fit for a juvenile justice facility can be kind of challenging at times, and it really does begin with understanding the type of candidate that you're seeking and clearly communicating the skills necessary to perform the job. And Jackie talked a lot about that in her presentation. So the first step is in that process is to make sure that you have a solid and clear job description. And as Jackie also mentioned, you know, the competency-based behavior interviews are an effective method for selecting individuals whose core values really align with your agency and/or facility mission. Formal action plan is absolutely necessary. I just mentioned that developing, you know, an action plan is really an important factor to success. So you really need to involve staff from various disciplines, which includes direct care staff, in this action plan development process as it relates to recruitment and hiring and staff retention or workforce development. So it's important that, you know, when you're doing the action planning, to make sure that you identify who are going to lead each of those activities. So there's some kind of ownership. And then you also want to make sure that you have target dates set. And then also, I think this is one piece that folks forget. Some people tend to, you know, they'll create an action plan and it kind of sits on the shelf, which doesn't really help anyone. So it's really critical that that you're regularly reviewing that plan to ensure that the implementation activities are completed within the target timeframes, and/or having a conversation to say what's working, what isn't working, did we miss a step, do we need to add some things to the plan. And then fourth and finally, accurate data and tracking progress is critical. So again, I talked about basically data is very a powerful tool that, you know, can help you take a look at those root causes that are contributing to your high staff turnover. And so using that data from exit surveys, culture climate surveys, and focus groups can really highlight those areas for improvement and provide some insight into what staff are thinking and feeling, some of those staff perceptions with regard to the current work environment. So, and it could also be used to monitor success. So those are just some highlights to keep in mind. Next slide, please. And so just to leave you, before we switch over to talk a little bit about resources and then kind of answer a couple questions with the limited time we have left, just to leave you with one last reminder that developing and retaining a healthy organization and workforce does not happen overnight. So leaders are really going to need to be patient and steady in their persistence. So changing culture, as many of us know, is a journey with many ups and downs and twists and turns. But supporting staff and providing them with the tools necessary to successfully do their job duties and helping them maintain a healthy lifestyle with regard to work are really critical pieces to improving job satisfaction and ultimately staff retention. So next slide, please. So here are just a few resources here. Just wanted to share with you. These are two really helpful. The Workforce Development Planning and Assessment Toolkit created by the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute really offers a step-by-step process for assessing an agency's workforce needs and developing a strategic work plan for recruiting and retaining staff. The thing I like about this toolkit is that it's free, which is always a good thing, and it also includes a number of worksheets that will help guide your agency through the workforce development process. Second piece there is Stinchcomb is a manual that was created. It's actually called The Future is Now, Recruiting, Retaining, and Developing the 21st Century in Jail Workforce. funny enough, the manual is written for jails, but the manual really does provide a number of checklists that guide readers through kind of the workforce development process. It really is easy to use, and I've found it very, very helpful to take a, so I encourage you all to look at that. The Stinchcomb uses a 4-part structure or framework for enhancing recruitment and retention, and I found it very simple and straightforward and really easy to use. And of course, on the screen there, you'll see the link to the a shared resource folder that was housed on the CJCA website that provides another, a whole other slew of resources that folks can access. So next slide, please. And then next slide is just other resources. The PowerPoint is going to be made available to folks afterwards, so don't worry, you don't need to scribble these down real quickly. But anyway, these are just some other resources for you. And so we have about, 9 minutes or so. So I'm going to just ask a few of the questions that have come in throughout the presentation here. So let's see. So Jackie, this one was geared towards you and Mark. The question was around what kinds of assessments that agencies are using to screen for personality traits. So if you wouldn't mind talking about like what Utah does, that would be great. Jackie? Sure.
Utah used to use, actually we used it for 5 years, it's the Ergometrics Impact Juvenile Correctional Officer Test. It is about an hour and a half, and the reason we stopped using it was not because it wasn't a great process, but because it did kind of delay the hiring practice a little bit. So part of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget came in and they said, we want you to try to get staff hired as quickly as possible. And so we've put that on pause for a while, but it is a really good tool that can screen for personality issues. It looks at things like boundaries. Will a staff member struggle with boundaries? It looks at leadership qualities. Some of those competency things that we looked at for characteristics that we're looking for. And then the Diana screen is a computer-based pre-hire volunteer risk management screen that helps protect you from sexual abuse or sexual boundary issues. So that's another one that is being used. And then Oregon has a correctional officer video test, which I think it's North Carolina. So those are all in the toolkit, and Ergometrics for Impact is really it's a great test. It's just a little bit lengthy, and we stopped using it. Great. Thank you, Jackie. That's helpful. So we had another question for you as well. So this one talks a little bit about, the interview process. And, the question was around, some people tend to interview very well, but turn out to not be such great employees and vice versa. So they don't interview well, so maybe we don't hire them, and they would have been good employees. Do you, and Simone, feel free to, weigh in on this, but I'll have Jackie and Mark speak to it first. Do you have any tips on how to discern, these types of, how do we siphon them out? How do we discern between the two? Any kinds of tips? So,
I think.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Oh no, Jackie, you brought up a good point earlier about the scenario-based interview types of questions. As much as you can simulate that, it's kind of difficult with some of the challenges that are inherent to the jobs themselves to develop some scenario-based questions. But one or two of those will be a good indicator and might shed some light. Actually have the interviewee act out or go through what some of these situations, how to act out in those crisis type situations. Sorry, go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, so one of the ones that we have done on those scenario-based interviews, we will have a crisis situation where the applicant will walk into a room and we'll have the TV blaring, we'll have and we won't actually act it out, but we'll have a TV blaring, and then we'll say there's a fight in the corner, there's a argument over here, and then there's a youth who is crying hysterically over here. How would you react? And then watching them respond to that reaction is always a really good indicator for how they're going to be on the job in some of those crisis situations. It doesn't always work, but it does kind of put them on their best behavior. We had screened out some applicants who ended up being excellent candidates for us, who have been here for 20 years.
Great, thank you. see some other questions here. There's a question around, are you aware of, or anyone aware of, whether or not there's actual research on the impact of a 12-hour shift has on staff versus an 8 or 10-hour shift? And both of you, everyone can answer that as well. I just want to say that I believe that Massachusetts recently did a study on that for themselves. I'm not aware of specific research around that, but I definitely am now really interested in kind of digging deeper on that issue. Utah, do you have any, are you a 12-hour shift, 10-hour shift?
We're, actually, it depends. Some facilities are 8-hour shifts, and then we can go up to 12, but we try not to, just because we want to keep, the work-home life balance good. So we do swing shifts, and usually it's 8 to 10 hours. Rarely
Okay.
is it 12 unless there's crisis.
Okay. Is that Smoon?
I know that when I worked in the facility itself, that we tried 10-hour shifts for a while, and there were some challenges to that. Scheduling, it looks good on paper, but for 8, like Jackie spoke to the work-life balance, the 8 seemed to have happier staff, and there were some things that were easier to schedule around vacation, sick days, things like that, as opposed to the 10.
Great.
Yeah, there was something that MacArthur and the National Center on Mental Health and Juvenile Justice did several years ago that did in fact take a look at this. I just can't remember if it's research or a study, and it showed that the 8 to 10 hour sort of working shift as opposed to 12. Staff was happier, as Mark said, and then also there were fewer incidences. I don't remember which one, or it may have been both of them, when MacArthur had their models for change initiative in motion. I'm pretty sure that was covered during that time period.
Great. So maybe what we can do is, maybe we can kind of find that article and then send it out via email to folks. I think that would be great. Great. Thank you. Okay. Well, we only have about 2 more minutes, so I think I'm going to hand it off back to Wendy for some closing remarks. Wendy?
Thank you, Sharon. Again, I want to thank all of our presenters and all of our participants on today's webinar for taking time to work on this important issue. As we worked on this project over the last 12 months, it really became clear that both staff wellness and staff training had a profound impact on the culture and atmosphere of our facilities. In turn, these factors had an enormous impact on staff retention issues that have historically plagued our facilities. So I want to encourage all of you to attend our next webinar on facility culture and staff retention, which is scheduled for Monday, May 6th at 1, and that will be Eastern Standard Time. Also note that today's webinar will be posted on the CJCA website. And lastly, there will be a short survey for you to take upon closing out of the application. If you could please fill that out so we can use your feedback to improve on our future webinars, it would be really appreciated. And with that, I'll say have a nice day. Thank you.